All right, good evening, everyone. I now call the special meeting of the City Council of the City of Lancaster to order for Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. Some quick reminders at the top of the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed, so if you are in this meeting, you may be recorded. During this evening's public comment period, which is just for the single item on our special agenda, please make sure that you begin with your name and your block of residence for the meeting record. And please make your comments at the microphone here at the podium so that you can be heard both in the room and on the recording. For all of those who are willing and able, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Be seated. Mr. Harris, would you please call the roll of members?
Yes, Madam President. Mr. Ahmed.
Here.
Mr. Arroyo.
Here.
Mr. Cleese.
Here.
Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz. Ms. Walsh. And President Baker.
Here. All right, we have one item on our legislative agenda this evening. It is an ordinance for first reading. So, Mr. Harris, if you would begin with that, please.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, authorizing a referendum on the question of studying the existing form of government and considering the advisability of the adoption of a home rule charter for the City of Lancaster, providing for the repeal of inconsistent ordinances, providing for the severability of the ordinance, and providing that the ordinance shall take effect upon passage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Again, this is a first reading this evening. We're going to be hearing a presentation this evening from Kelly Robertson, the Executive Director of the Governor's Center for Local Government Services, and Andrew Schief, Local Government Policy Manager. As a reminder to everyone here and to all of us, the ordinance that's before Council is to authorize a referendum or ballot question asking whether it should form a study commission to study home rule. The Council is not deciding whether to form this commission. Rather, we are considering this evening putting it to that question to the voters. Tonight is a first reading, and I'll remind everyone of this later, with a vote expected at our next special meeting, which will be on February 6th, that's a Monday, at 5:30 p.m. here in this room. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Andrew, who will be providing tonight's presentation. At the conclusion of the presentation, members of council will get to make comment or ask questions, and then I will turn it over to members of the public. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, go ahead and bring that nice and close so that gets caught on the recording.
Thank you for inviting us. We do appreciate that, and I appreciate the attendance of the residents, and I apologize for having my back to you. What we will do this evening is we will do the presentation. Andrew's going to do the presentation for you. We will take all questions and hopefully be able to answer all the questions that you have for us and be able to move forward with possibly put for the second reading of putting this on the ballot. I think it's the idea on the ballot.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Schief. I'm a local government policy manager at the state's Department of Community and Economic Development. I supervise a team that works throughout the Commonwealth to provide technical assistance and advice to local governments. And we're here tonight to talk about home rule in Pennsylvania. We'll go through what it does, the reasons for it, some limitations around home rule, and just why some communities have entertained this and gone through it and actually passed a home rule charter for themselves. Our first slide. Home rule transfers the basic authority to act in municipal affairs from state law to a local charter drafted, adopted, and amended by the municipal voters. State law, so Pennsylvania is a state that is governed by what they call Dillon's Rule. So other states are actually governed by what they call home rule, where each municipality can create their own charters as fairly standard practice. In Pennsylvania, we are bound by state law, state ordinance, and municipal class. In the 1970s, the General Assembly gave municipalities the ability to do what we call create a home rule charter, which is drafted, adopted, and amended by municipal voters. So the Government Study Commission isn't formed, nor is a charter adopted without vote by the electorate. And if it is to ever change, it would need to be amended by those voters. So what is home rule? Home rule municipalities may exercise powers and perform functions not denied by the U.S. Constitution. So you can't have a home rule charter that goes against the United States Constitution, the Pennsylvania Constitution. It cannot go around certain state laws. So some state laws will say each home rule municipality is bound to these state laws because of their relevance and importance. Also laws that are uniform and applicable in every part of the Commonwealth. So even if it doesn't say these laws are applicable to home rule municipalities, there are certain statutes, think of environmental laws or sunshine, right to know, which we don't get around through the home rule charter process. And you'll also be bound by the home rule charter itself. And again, it transfers authority in municipal affairs from state law, municipal codes, to a local charter adopted and amended by the voters, decided upon, approved, and amended by the voters. Some very high-level principles of home government. It's an opportunity to shift governance from state municipal code to local citizens, allows for flexibility in defining structure, powers, and what is most often the common denominator in municipalities' choice to entertain home rule, taxation, and other functions of the municipality, and an opportunity to create a government that best meets the needs of the municipality. Some reasons for home rule. It identifies accountability and focused political leadership. Some municipal codes, the old third-class commission form of local government, even some borough situations, it can get murky. Who's accountable for what? What political leadership needs to focus on, whether they're the governing body, whether they're executing ordinances. It can get a little bit murky. And home rule can help refocus, identify accountability, and focus the political leadership. Professional administration. More often than not, there is some form of professional administration that's included in a home rule charter. Whether that person has full executive authority or whether that's just an administrator that is in a more limited role that oversees certain office functions. It can enhance fiscal procedures and controls. The home rule charter is to be tailored to each municipality. Some places have really struggled with finances and internal controls, and it's a live issue. Something that can be looked at. Flexibility. Again, this bullet point highlights certain flexibility that can come with a citizen-developed home rule charter, often looking at taxation. Separate legislative and executive functions. That kind of goes with the top two bullet points. Again, it can get a little bit murky when roles aren't clearly defined. Residual powers. One of the key things in our opinion to consider when developing a home rule charter is you would like to keep it as short as possible. So what this is going to do is really develop the high-level structure of the government form. After the charter is developed, all of the remaining powers still lie and remain with the governing body. That's what residual powers means. And one of the key pieces of that is, writing your own administrative code. You're not having to reinvent the wheel, but an administrative code is often written which lays out how the departments work, the administrative responsibilities and operations, if that needs to be more clearly defined as a result of the home rule charter. Folks look at increasing citizen participation through home rule. increasing responsiveness. I mean, that's what it's all about, being responsive to citizens, to elected officials. And, you can look at how representation works, perhaps a wider representation. With the representation thing, I think, for instance, of many boroughs have wards, and considering going to at-large voter, voting situation. So those are some of the principles and the reasons behind home rule. This is a long list of limitations of home rule. I don't think you'll need me to go through each of these bullet points, but it really gives you a flavor of, things that are meant to be uniform and applicable throughout the Commonwealth, things which you wouldn't be able to change through a home rule charter. Police arbitration, collective bargaining, binding arbitration, mergers, consolidations, boundary change, election code can't change through a home rule charter. Municipal elections will still be held on odd years. Ethics law, your financial disclosure procedures are still in place. Recall is unconstitutional per the Supreme Court. Sunshine laws, open records, environmental statutes. You can't put limitations on any private businesses through a home rule charter. Zoning, the municipal planning code remains the same. Your zoning hearing board, saldos, official map. Unit Debt Act, if you take out debt, there's still filings with that. Again, I'm going to keep highlighting here taxation subjects. So one of the misconceptions of home rule is that you can just create new taxes. That is absolutely not the case with home rule. You can change the rates of taxation, which we'll get into a little bit later, but you can't create new subjects of taxation. You can't create a sugary beverage tax or a sales tax through a home rule charter process. And you can only look at taxes that are levied on residents. You also can't create any type of new tax on a non-resident or a worker who commutes into the city to work. There are taxes in place for those purposes, but no new taxes can be created for those purposes, nor can existing taxes, taxing caps be removed on non-resident commuters that come into the city. And some other clean streams, sewage facilities, DEP-related environmental statutes. Home rule considerations. So these are things that a government study commission would be considering if they are to be formed. Forms of government: weak mayor, strong mayor, council manager. We have some slides and a little bit about those. Taxation, real estate code limitations. Yes, you are limited to 30 mills of real estate taxes. Lancaster County had a reassessment not too long ago, and I believe the city is pretty far from that limit. It's a different situation in some other municipalities that haven't reassessed since the 60s and are bumping up against that limit. Not so much the case here. But you may be looking at a real estate deed transfer tax, which is limited at 0.5% to the city, or the earned income tax on residents, which is limited at 0.5% on city residents. Operations and procedures, meetings, how special meetings are called, time and date of an organizational meeting, public hearings, if there's a need to look at that, perhaps for a controversial ordinance, something along those lines. It's important to stipulate how records and minutes are kept, certain operating rules, filling a vacancy, some of the more mundane aspects, not totally reinventing the wheel, but a consideration and something to look at through the process. Legislative actions, they are a form of action by the governing body. How ordinances are publicized, how they become effective, those dates, codification, where their record book is kept, how and when codification occurs, legislative actions. Okay, so those are some high-level points of home rule considerations. Quick history. I'm going to start before 1968. 1920, our Constitution was amended to allow home rule. It took the General Assembly 20 years to provide enabling legislation, which was only for the city of Philadelphia. And then 30 years later, we were finally given enabling legislation to do the home rule process. 1968, they went through a process, and the law was enacted and effective in 1972. And at that point, you saw a bit of a flurry of municipalities going down doing the home rule process, forming home rule charters. And still, every year, you probably see a few, 3, 4, 5 home rule charters being developed. So 79 municipalities. After this past election, we might have to update that number, a few more. But also 7 counties have adopted home rule. With regards to the forms of government which might be looked at, we're going to provide 3 examples here. So the first one is what I would call like a weak mayor form of government. A mayor is elected, but that individual is just a part of council, has no particularly large powers. Council appoints the manager, the solicitor, the engineer, boards and commissions. And then what's key in this format is them appointing a manager, who then hires the directors and the employees and manages the staff. The next slide is something Lancaster's more used to in other third-class cities. I would say this is kind of like a strong mayor form of government. The voters elect the mayor and they elect council separately. Mayor is not a member of council. Mayor appoints the boards and commissions and appoints the manager with council's consent. And again, in this situation, the manager appoints the directors and manages the employees. The last scenario we'll cover here, which you'll see more in smaller municipalities, is the council manager form of government. And in this form, there is no mayor. It's just an elected governing body, 7 to 9 members. They appoint the manager, solicitor, engineer, and again, the manager manages the city, the borough, what have you. So we've mentioned this a few times, but we did want to have one slide on this just because, like I said, it is more often than not the common denominator of why a municipality would consider home rule. It allows a municipality to adopt a new taxation system, more modern, more efficient. Modern. The Local Tax Enabling Act was passed in 1965. A lot has changed since 1965. The Local Tax Enabling Act has not changed very much. So modern and efficient, based on a municipality's needs. That's how you do a budget. You look at the services you provide, you look at what the citizens, expect, and the needs of the municipality, and you have to match your revenues to provide that quality of life in a municipality. Provide for quality of services. And one of the main reasons this is brought up is it offers relief for an aging population. The 2 taxes I mentioned previously on residents, the deed transfer tax for purchases and transfer of property, and the earned income tax. By its name, it's a tax on wages. So people who are earning a wage are the burden can be shifted to folks who have a living wage rather than folks who are aging in their homes on fixed incomes. Property tax is levied by the municipality, by the county, by the school district. It's a heavily used form of taxation. And it's very sad when people find themselves in a situation where they're on a fixed income and they're having trouble paying their taxes. This home rule can offer more of a menu of taxation of your revenue streams, for more options on how you bring in revenue to provide services. Taxation limits. This focuses a little bit more on real estate taxes, which again is not so much of a concern here in Lancaster County, topping out at that 30 mils. But I'll stress again, the taxation limits per third-class city code, earned income tax is capped at 1%, with Lancaster having 0.6%, and they have a 0.1% based on some Act 24. It's a bit in the weeds. But generally what you see is 0.5% go to the school district, 0.5% go to the municipality. And that 0.5% can be, that cap on that can be lifted through home rule. I think I skipped the slide. Okay. So, forming a government study commission. It can happen one of two ways. One, a referendum is placed on the ballot by an ordinance of the governing body, or if 5% of the electors in the last gubernatorial general election put together a petition. This question can be placed on the ballot. When this question is placed on the ballot, it asks two questions. One, would you like to form a government study commission to study the existing form of government and the home rule process, and ultimately, potentially, develop a home rule charter? And two, that ordinance or petition has to say how many government study commission members there will be if this is passed. And we don't go into too much depth here about how one would get on the government study commission. So just to go over that quickly, the ordinance or the petition has to happen 13 weeks prior to the primary or the general election. Between 13 weeks and 10 weeks, anybody who wants to run for a government study commission can circulate their nomination papers to be on the ballot, to be elected to this commission. I think it's a general, you have to be a registered voter. You have to have your name. It has to identify you as a candidate for the government study commission, your address. People who sign the petition have to be qualified voters and put their address. It's a typical nomination paper process. And really, talking with the county election bureau is the authority to really figure out exactly the best way to obtain nomination papers, make sure they're correct and circulated and filed appropriately. But those need to be filed by the 10th Tuesday before the primary. So then it goes to the primary, and when voters vote yes or no on to whether or not to form a government study commission, at that time they would also vote. You would also see who all is running, and at that time you would vote for who you would like to be on the government study commission. And it's important to emphasize that even if you are not in favor of a government study commission, you should still vote for somebody to be on that government study commission, because if it passes, whoever has the most votes will be on it. So it's even if you're not in favor of it, it's still a way to have input and an opportunity to have some say in this. If it passes, the same question cannot be placed on the ballot as a referendum for 5 years. Okay. So the timeline. So let's say citizens vote in favor of a government study commission. Within 10 days of the certification of elections, each government study commission member that's been elected has to take an oath with the district justice generally. And then within 15 days of the certification, the government study commission must organize and hold its first public meeting. What you'll often see is that first organizational meeting will happen within 10 days of the certification, and they'll just have the district justice at that first meeting. But that first meeting, you'll elect, the Government Study Commission will elect a chair, a vice chair, often a treasurer, and a secretary, although the secretary and treasurer aren't required. Decide upon rules that they'll use to run the commission, and just talk about their timeline and how often they want to meet, and sort of sort those things out. At that time, within 9 months of the certification of the election, really, it's called a Government Study Commission. The first 9 months is just that commission studying third-class city code, studying Lancaster City, reaching out to other municipalities that have done home rule, asking them what works, what doesn't work. Really just learning all you can about a home rule charter and Lancaster and the forms of government that may best, ways that it can be perhaps tweaked, or what all would be contained in that charter. Another key point I do want to emphasize before I forget is that, change for its own sake is not always a workable thing. What folks like about their community, what works in the community, is oftentimes something to really consider just keeping too, with the tweaks where they're needed, which is, I think, an important point to make. So after 9 months, if the Government Study Commission has found out that they're very satisfied with everything about the current form of government, the taxation, the structure, all of that stuff, and they don't think a home rule charter is necessary, then they file a final report and they're discharged of their duties, and the process is over. If they do want to entertain writing a charter, there will be a vote at their meeting, and they will then proceed to use the next 9 months to write that charter. This slide is a bit wordy, I have to say, but what it comes down to is that, so if they write a home rule charter, it then goes to 18 months pass. It goes to the county for the voters to decide upon if they want to adopt it by referendum. If it passes, that next January is when it becomes effective. It's advisable to look at the administrative code that exists in the municipality and perhaps amend it or write a new one to go along with the home rule charter, which we discussed earlier, and to make sure all ordinances are codified, to make it a seamless process as possible. I think this is our last slide. It's home rule resources or information. I've seen quite a few home rule processes. Misinformation can really run rampant. It's a challenge, as anything public, and as public as this can be. So I think it's important to get as many sources as you can to really do some research if you're interested in this topic. We, the Governor's Center for Local Government Services, have a really fantastic handbook that the back part of it is the legislation. The front part of it is just explaining the legislation in plain English. It's a really, really nice document. We're also available for phone calls, answer questions, emails, just be a resource. Other home rule municipalities, critical to be informed by how things are working in those places. The Pennsylvania Municipal League Home Rule Advocacy Committee, League of Women Voters, colleges, universities, professors, grad students, ICMA, International City-County Management Association. Carefully consider where your information is coming from. It may be wise to use multiple sources to help ensure that a sound charter is produced. And with that, that's the conclusion of our presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. I'll start out with questions up on here on this end. I'll just remind everyone in the audience this evening that you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. Just two things. So I want to make sure that everyone's clear tonight that the question in front of council is to put the question to the voters of whether or not we want to form the study commission. So sort of we are here orienting us in this question. So specifically about the study commission, can you talk a little bit about who guides that process once a study commission may be formed as they meet for those initial 9 months?
Sure. I mean, ultimately, it's up to the commission members and the chair. But DCED is often a resource to come in, attend meetings, provide guidance, however we can be helpful. Also, there are consultants who are very familiar with the process, very fluent with charters and local government issues and all of those things. So in some cases, a consultant will also be hired to help steer the process.
Thank you very much.
You know what, I just want to
Kelly, yes.
reiterate, to be
Mhm.
very clear, this is your process. So whether you pick the 7, 9, 11 people, those will be the people that will be more so guiding this process.
Great.
We will be resources, but you're guiding.
Terrific. Thank you. I'll take questions from members of council.
I have one.
Councilor Craig?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And it's my understanding that the commission would be made up of the constituents of the city. And is it bipartisan or is that our choice?
That's a fantastic question. It's nonpartisan. So the nomination papers you circulate, a potential candidate would circulate, there's no political affiliation on them.
Thank you.
Questions from councilors on this end? Councilor Ahmed?
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for the presentation. Is this presentation going to be available to council and to the public afterwards?
It will. I was, just to quickly answer that, there is a landing page on the city website, and this presentation, recording of this meeting, all pertinent information will be made available to the public there.
Thank you. And one of my questions is, how has Home Rule Charter kind of differed between municipalities coming out of Act 47 versus those who are not coming out of Act 47?
There are a lot of similarities, I would say. People decide upon what I have most often seen, although this might not be the direct answer to the question, but what I've most often seen, whether it's a municipality in Act 47 or not, is looking at taxation, and generally somewhere in the Home Rule Charter, there's something about more professional administration.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is regard to aging populations and trying to mitigate property taxes. Will the commission be looking at, making recommendations on not increasing millage rates versus increasing earned income tax? Is that something that they would be looking at as well?
Not necessarily. I mean, that to me is more of a policy decision that would remain with the governing body. I think they would need to look at the different situations and potential need for flexibility. But, getting into the weeds of what rates should end up being, or trying to, set certain rates per a Home Rule Charter, that kind of thing is not so much a structure of government, it's really a policy decision that will always lie and remain with the governing body.
And is there a cap at what the earned income tax could be set at?
I believe you can put a cap on how much it can be raised per year, but I believe there was a Supreme Court ruling that said you cannot put an ultimate cap on a rate of taxation.
Thank you, and thank you, Council President.
I would like to add also that when you look at the municipalities that have taken on home rule, whether they're Act 47 or not, you will see that once they do the home rule process and procedure and put it into effect, they're stronger. And they've been able to stand stronger and continue stronger. So it has made quite a difference.
Thank you.
If I could just interject, because I'm not sure everybody here knows, what is Act 47?
Thank you.
You can take that one.
So Act 47 is a program we manage at DCED. And if a municipality has reached a point where they can no longer provide for the health, safety, and welfare of their residents, you get to a point where you can't make payroll with your police any longer, or pay the folks to pick up garbage any longer. A severe situation, that's where in the 1980s, after the collapse of the steel industries and really the bottom fell out in the 80s, this Act 47 of 1987 was created, and it's a process for the department to come in and provide more heavy-handed oversight of a municipality, to develop a plan and to work with the municipality to implement that plan, to try to get back to financial solvency.
Thank you.
Council
Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for the presentation today. Just a clarifying question regarding the study commission. Are the members that joined the study commission also responsible for writing the charter that comes after?
Go ahead, you. That's correct. Yeah, well, they're responsible for drafting the charter, but if it's passed by the voters, then they're completely discharged of their duties and the commission goes away.
And what does that 9-month process look like? Or do you guys also provide guidance during that process, or what does that look like, or could look like?
The first nine months of the drafting of the charter, if there is some consultant help, that is a good place for it to be used. Perhaps with some legal folks too, just to make sure that nothing's going to go against current statutes, and that sort of legal technical aspect of drafting a charter. There are many examples, freely available online to look at. But at that point, we can, help a little bit, but there is, if a consultant is used, that's kind of the place for them to step in with some legal advice.
Also, there's so many communities that are been involved in this process, that you have failures, you have successes, you have communities that have actually stayed with it for many years until they got it right for their community. So there is such a phenomenal resource out there for other communities that have been through this process. For you.
Thank you.
You don't have to do this from the ground up. There's plenty of resources that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already out there.
It's always helpful. Thank you.
Councilor Kleist.
So thank you for the presentation. And we already have a strong mayor form of government. I was wondering if operating under home rule, we know that operating under home rule will give more freedom to the administration. So operating under home rule, wouldn't that give more power, more freedom to the administration to push policies that the community doesn't agree with?
It would all depend upon how you write your home rule and how you decide to develop your government. That's why we gave you 3 examples, and those aren't the only examples. But you will choose, the committee will choose, and your home rule charter will dictate how you set it up, who has the power, who doesn't.
And another question, how do we plan to inform the community about the home rule? There are many people don't know, and that they cannot vote on something that they don't have any information. What are the means that can be used in order to inform them before they vote?
At this point, this is what we're trying to do. Once we get this on the ballot, then it's going to be the community. This is a community effort. You're going to have to get the word out there. And we will do more sessions like this, as many as we need to, or you need us to educate as many people as we can, and to help help the residents to understand exactly what you're trying to do, and how you would like to move forward. And in the presentation, Andrew also was very clear, and I want to make sure that you heard it. When we're talking about home rule, we don't want to throw everything out, okay? If the things are working and it's the way you want it to keep working, we keep that, okay? So what we do is just tweak the things that aren't working or maybe could work better.
Okay, the other question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages for a city of Lancaster, like Lancaster operating under home rule? Because, there are other cities bigger than Lancaster who operate under home rule. So what are the pros and cons for a city of Lancaster to operate under home rule? The pros and cons.
I think that's what the study commission's task would be, Councilor Shart. The whole process of putting together the study commission is for them to study the pros and the cons and to be able to lay out a set of recommendations to the public, ultimately to be decided by the electorate. If that is that we don't think this is a good idea, then there is a decision made not to advance with any kind of home rule charter, which has happened. Study commissions have been formed and they've evaluated and they've decided that, in fact, we are not going to pursue a home rule charter. Other study commissions have been established and they do make changes and they advance a home rule charter. And then there's a whole other level of community engagement and education that would happen at that point to explain what those changes would mean and what if they vote yay, this is what would happen, and if they vote nay, then the existing form of government would remain with the same authority. So there's many questions about what the pros and cons are, and in my estimation, and please weigh in, that is the charge of the study commission if you boil it all the way down. What are the pros and cons, and what are the recommendations?
And the people who are gonna be on the commission, what criteria do we use in order to elect
Yes.
those people?
So DCED actually sent me a job description for, and I'd love for you to talk about it a little bit. What I'll say is that we are refining that a little bit just to Lancaster and planning to share that on the website either tomorrow or by Friday so that people have a sense of what the job description is for a commissioner. And you can talk a little bit about the time commitment. If you could talk about the time commitment, the roles and responsibility, and also how many signatures they would need, that would be helpful.
The signatures seem to be where everyone panics. It's not as bad as it seems. You basically have to have a percentage of the number that last voted within your community. So we're talking 200 or less signatures. So it's not a lot of people that you have to get to sign your petition in order for you to run for the committee or commission. You will decide whether it's going to be, like I said, 7, 9, 11, usually it's like 7. And all of you basically could run if you would like to. You have to be a resident. And you'll see the other criteria that you have decided on and that you would like for your residents, for your homeroom commission, when that description is put on your site. And the commitment can be a little bit, it can be a lot, all right? But it's usually like 2 meetings a month. And the thing that you have to remember is we're only talking about a short period of time, all right? So it's only like, first off, your first 9 months, all right, to figure out what you want to do with this and do the investigation. That is your biggest point in time that you will have to commit. And you do need to commit to it. If you're going to do it, you do need to commit to it. And in 18 months, you have to have it basically done. So the longest time frame that we're looking at is probably like 2 meetings a month for 18 months. And then it would be done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Kleist. I want to again orient us in the question of the ordinance before council, that the ordinance is really asking if we want to put the question on the ballot to form the study commission. So the folks up here are not deciding at our next meeting whether or not to form a study commission. We are deciding to put that question to our residents and our voters. And I think that that's a really important distinction, because we've talked a lot about the commission leading this process. It really is a resident-led process. And so for me, that's a very important distinction. I want to make sure that everyone in the room and everyone listening tonight understands. I will ask again if there are any other questions from council.
Council President, I have one last question. if I
Councilor
may.
Ahmed.
Thank you again for answering the questions this evening. With your experience with other municipalities who have gone through this charter, how have they also made cuts in their spending? Because, some folks who may be wary about forming a charter may say, this is, it's not going to lead to cuts in spending that residents would like to see. So how have municipalities, worked once they do go through the home rule charter or during the 18-month process with, also making budgetary cuts from the administration?
Well, I mean, as part of their budget process, I can't pick out any specific examples of line items, that were more easily cut from a home rule charter community. But, at the end of the day, it's the people voting on the taxes are also citizens themselves. And I think, we vote, elect the governing bodies in to make those decisions. I think there are certain efficiencies that can be garnered from a home rule charter form of government. That's absolutely something that needs to be looked at when developing a charter. How effective are things? How efficient are things? How responsible are situations created by this form of government we've created? And then that just in itself, being a principle of what's trying to be developed, can in itself create efficiencies, which can relieve some certain expenditures.
And I just add to
Thank
that,
you.
if I may, just to say that the concept of a charter, think about it as a guiding document, but behind that guiding document are all of the administrative code that is part of our ordinances, our budget, the policies that are part of how we, operate as a government. All of those things are situated as on the foundation of the charter, if you will, as an organizing guiding document. But that level of detail is not spelled out in the charter itself, because the charter is not something that is easily amended. You want it to be the guiding document, and then it is up to council and the administration in terms of how we achieve what is set out in the guiding document. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. I guess just what I believe some residents are weary of is if we do adopt a charter, is it going to result in, the city not making cuts as well? And is it just going to result in increased taxes?
Yeah, I think that this is an ongoing conversation that we're going to have, and we're having internally right now. I had indicated to council that we've already begun our forecasting for 2023 budget to eliminate at minimum $2 million of expenses so that we're not utilizing reserves, because we budgeted $2 million of reserves to come to a balanced budget this year. In addition, I'll just say again, we are relying right now on ARPA funds to really provide for the stability in the services, and those monies are going away in 2025. And so 2026 is critical for us, and there's no way that we get to 2026 without figuring out a different balance in how we are generating revenue, and also looking for additional efficiencies, operational efficiencies, and potential cuts to services. And that is a decision that ultimately council will make as the administration continues to work through reviewing all of that and then bringing to council our proposed budget for 2024.
Thank you, Mayor.
And Adam, you mentioned something that's tangential to that, that is that if this process moves forward and there is either the commission, correct me if I'm wrong, if the commission would decide to make no changes or if any changes they'd propose would be voted down by the voters, you mentioned that there's a 5-year period where we would not be able to consider this again. Is that correct in both of those cases?
Correct.
Great. Thank you. Any other? Councilor Cleeks?
I would like to know how much, the home rule will affect the legal structure of the city.
Well, how much it would affect the legal structure of the city?
Yes.
Well, it's really just it's the high level structure of the city, right? How many folks on the governing body? We went over the different types of forms of government that have been used in the past: the weak mayor, the strong mayor, the council manager. So that high level structure is what's put in place by the charter. But like legally, in the ordinances and those policies, still remains, those residual powers remains with the governing body. So the legal structure, you're still held to the U.S. Constitution, PA Constitution, environmental laws, all of those things. Home Rule Charter will put in place the high-level structure of the government, and then the governing body will still be, the ones who create the laws, pass the laws, develop the policy.
So most of the code of the city will change, right? The city code.
No.
No,
No.
no.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's a semantical thing. We talk about city code as in our ordinances that we pass, the laws that we enact, and not the form of government or the charter that guides those codes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
That's an important distinction, and I think we should hash that out this evening, so thank you. Other questions of council before I turn this over to questions from the public? All right. I will remind everyone again that you need to begin your questions with your name and block of residence for the record of the meeting. Comments and questions are limited to 3 minutes per individual, and I will keep time just to make sure that everyone who would like to ask questions gets the opportunity to do so this evening. If you want to do so, step right up, do so in an orderly fashion, and adjust your questions to council or our presenters this evening. All right, thank you so much. Go right ahead.
Yes. I came here tonight because I read in the paper the
Could I have you just begin with your name and block of residence?
Andrew Marshall, 11 on the block of Union Street. Was talking about earned income. My understanding, we can't, that home rule council will not create any new taxes. They have the option of whether they want to increase property taxes or the earned income credit, correct?
Yeah, that's a decision the governing body will make.
Okay, so, I don't see the reason for a home rule. I mean, it's these folks' job to come up with some rules and restructure the way things are now. That's what these guys are getting compensated for. I personally don't see a reason to have it, but if you do, I'm definitely running to make sure something is, I'm not taxed out of the city. So I just, from listening to you, can't create any new taxes. There's no reason for us to have another committee to do what these guys are supposed to do.
If I may, Mr. Marshall, thank you for that question, and it's an opportunity to just talk about the fact that the city of Lancaster has 4 taxes that we can levy, and each 3 of those taxes have caps that have been set by the state that cannot be lifted, which means that the only revenue increase that the city of Lancaster, that council has control over, is property taxes. And so the reason why I am bringing this question to council and to the public for consideration of a home rule study is for one reason only. And that is because if we are only relying on property taxes, Property taxes remain, the assessed value of the city of Lancaster does not increase substantially year over year. It doesn't grow. It's flat. Despite all of the investment, despite the fact that houses are selling for $400,000, their assessed value has remained flat. Even through reassessment, we have to reduce our millage rate down so that we're not earning more money when that reassessment happens. So our millage rate now is just a little over 12 mills. That doesn't change. The revenue that we generate from that does not change unless we raise property taxes. Currently, we get about $30 million in property taxes and revenues, and our police and fire protection is $40 million. So that just gives you a sense of the imbalance that's happening. And so the only way that we can continue to meet the revenue needs is if we continue to raise taxes, and then obviously on the flip side, cut costs. And those things have been happening in parallel, raising taxes, cutting costs, raising taxes, cutting costs, for over a decade. Where we are now is looking at the fact that as a city, we see incomes growing in the city of Lancaster. Not for everybody, but over time, we have seen increases year over year over year over year. So the earned income tax, the amount of revenues that are generated by a set rate of 0.6%, which has not changed since when, Andrew? I can't remember when that extra, anyway, for a long time. So that earned income tax naturally is growing over time. But we can't capture that in the same way to have a natural growth in income because we can only adjust for property taxes. So if you are a resident in the city of Lancaster, you have seen your property taxes. Do you happen to own your own home?
Yes.
So you have seen your property taxes increase more than 9 times since 2006. And I can rattle off sort of, you've seen a 25% increase, you've seen a couple 10% increases, you've seen a 4% increase, all of these things to maintain a level of service in the city. We can, as a community, have a conversation about what services residents don't want anymore. But I will tell you, it's not the conversation that is had when people call my office. They're usually disappointed in the level of service that they're getting, or they want more. And so how do we pay for those services? That is the question that we need to wrestle with. That is part, for me, the main impetus for having this conversation about a study commission. And so you can look to us, as you should, as elected officials, to figure this problem out. But I will tell you, we're doing it with one arm tied behind our back because we literally have one tax we can increase. And if you want to just see property taxes continue, then that's the solution that's ahead of us, as well as a reduction in services. Those two things are going to happen.
So your issue is just to figure out another way to raise tax.
No, my issue is another way to pay for the services
Well, I get-
that
Or
naturally.
figure out how to get some efficiencies in the service that are provided.
Yes, and to find a way that is, quite frankly, more equitable to the people who are property owners in the city, because we know that those property taxes are a major burden for homeowners. We know that they're a major burden for senior citizens who have a fixed income, and we know that that it reaches a point when you add in the school district of Lancaster property taxes, that just can't continue to be the only, we can't keep going back to that well over and over and over and over again and not expect that people are going to be like, we can't afford to live here anymore. And I already hear that now. We are already, I believe, at that place. I know that the school district of Lancaster just took out a $200 million bond for a 4th phase of renovations, including the school that's in your neighborhood, Price Elementary. I don't begrudge, I'm a proud Red Tornado parent. I don't begrudge the school district from doing that, but they've already told us that they're expecting property tax increases for the next 6 years. So we look at what we're doing from a municipal perspective, and then you look at what's happening with the school district. It is not sustainable. And I'll also be really clear, this whole process of home rule is ridiculous. The fact that we have to go through this to get the kinds of tools that we need, like why don't we have an alcohol tax for all the people who come into the city and drink on Friday and Saturday nights that require our police to do after-hour details when the bars are letting out to make sure that people get home safely, that there aren't fights in the street, yada, yada. Those are the kinds of tools that ultimately I would like to see, but we don't have them because Harrisburg, quite frankly, isn't listening to us. So we have to take matters into our own hands, and that's what this process is, to study that. That's it. Does that help you, Mr. Marshall?
I knew all that.
Okay, good. That's excellent.
Yeah.
You
I'm
can
just-
come with me and help me educate others.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marshall.
Council
Good evening.
President, if I may.
Counselor, Mr. Acosta-Velez, could you just give us just 1 moment of forbearance? Counselor Arroyo?
Yeah, just,
I didn't start your time yet, don't worry.
just, I think real quick before we get into the next public comment, if our presenters could potentially zoom out a little bit and give maybe a breakdown of the phases and the timeline again, just to summarize, because I think we got a little bit into the weeds and knowing that this is just for the study phase of this, and just to remind the residents of that's what we're discussing tonight. I think it would be helpful to,
If this was a map of a mall and it said you are here,
Yeah.
tell us where we are.
So the ordinance has to be passed 13 weeks prior to the May primary. At the May primary, if it's voted yes, then the Government Study Commission studies the forms of government for 9 months. And that takes us to February? Yeah. Of 2024.
February, yes.
Yeah.
Just using my fingers to
Thank you.
count.
I need help with math sometimes. I appreciate that. February of 2024.
Mhm.
And then if they vote to proceed with developing a charter, then it's another 9 months, which takes us to the November general election for citizens to vote
Of 2024.
of November 2024.
to recap, once commissioners are selected, they do the study. Once a study is saying, yes, we're going to do a charter, we go through the charter. And then once the charter, if adopted, then any tax or increases, decreases based on this potential new framework, if any, is then voted upon based on the governing body, which is city council.
Correct.
Right. So we're at
In-
minimum 18
in-
months away from that, right?
18,
Yes, so you wouldn't see any changes or anything that the charter would actually do. You would not see that to January 2025.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Good perspective. Good evening, Mr. Acosta-Velez.
Hi, my name is Ivan Acosta Velez, and I speak two languages, so I'm going to say it in español. Me llamo Iván Acosta Vélez. My question to this body, the body that voted for taxes, did you look into a budget for this? This is not free, and you're telling us we can't afford and that we're raising taxes to cover stuff, and you're going into another expense. This expense wasn't presented, was it?
No, and what I.
Okay, let me finish my question.
I will.
I know you're going to give a long explanation. You guys have to look, you said, we're raising your taxes, your millage for water, your sewer rate, and all this stuff because we can't afford it. And now you're coming with this? How do you think it looks to me, an old man that's living from paycheck to paycheck, a Social Security resident, that's what I receive? How do you think it looks at me? And then you wonder why I come and question you. You raise taxes, you raise fees because you're going to afford it. What is the budget for this? This is not going to be free, okay? You're going to have maybe the solicitor be involved in some of these things, maybe some other staff. Did we look at this when we raised the taxes? Because you're the guys that raised the taxes. It wasn't Ivan Acosta. So I'm asking the question, okay? And my 3 minutes are not up.
Nope.
Let me tell you
going.
something, okay? What are you answering to us? Okay, and don't blame her. She put up the question, but you're the ones that are following. So please answer that question to me. How much is this going to cost me as a poor citizen of Lancaster? And it's not her fault. She's the mayor. She just gives you things to think about. But you guys, bum, 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 bum. We need to raise them. Now, that you raise them, how can we afford this? I mean, the money, los chavos. Where is the chavos coming from? Where's the money coming from? Okay? And people here are tired of you saying, yeah. This is going to cost money. Let's talk. This is like when you're coming to change my windows and my doors in my house. Oh, yeah. Well, are we going to subsidize this? Do we have a grant that we're going to use? And those are things that we need to know. I need to know because you raised my taxes, and that's my question.
Thank you, Mr. Acosta-Velez. To answer your question very simply, forming a study commission costs us $0. I will defer to Kelly or Andrew to talk about other municipalities and what kind of guidance, if any, they provided the study commission and if they spent their dollars on it. And this is just as an example. This is not saying that this is what Lancaster would do. But again, forming a study commission or putting the question on the ballot of whether we form a study commission costs $0. Kelly and Andrew, could you talk about any incurred costs from other municipalities that have done this, if you know of any?
I'm going to defer to Andrew because this is Andrew's department and what he manages are these funds. So, we will-
Yeah, so the budget for the Government Study Commission is ultimately is a negotiation between the Government Study Commission and the governing body. And those costs can vary. And each home rule report has a report out where they list, what expenses they incurred. And that's all available and can be researched. I will say, I don't know if we can make any promises per se, but Lancaster City has taken advantage of one of our programs called the Strategic Management Planning Program, and they've been good investments by the department for grant dollars for the city. And through that program, we have helped to fund a number of government study commissions.
So there's a potential for, if there is cost, this particular, what did you call that again? Strategic Management
Planning program.
Planning Program could provide grant fund dollars for any of those costs.
Correct.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Hi, my name's Amy Rufo. I live on West End and Virginia Avenue. I'm not sure if that's the information you guys wanted.
Your number block is fine.
338.
300.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Amy.
So I was coming up to ask about money too. I think it's important to do these studies because we can't know what is the correct road to take without having more information. And so one of my concerns was, would there be money to ensure that we are able to inform our residents, since it's resident-led? We'd need to find ways to share the information we learn, and it can't just be on a website, and it has to be in multiple languages. So so I just heard that means that the commission, sounds like the committee would be formed if it's approved, and then the committee would talk to you guys about how much we would have to spend, and perhaps by that time we'd know if there was grant funds available.
Yes, and I would also just add that in that process of developing the plan, we also have the apparatus of the city in terms of disseminating information, as well as partners that would be involved in this process. And so all of that would need to get sorted out, and it can't get sorted out if the question's not on the ballot.
Correct. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Gerald Bowen. I'm in the first block of Market Street.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if that's 0 to 100.
That's perfect.
Yeah. My question is actually more philosophical, or maybe has to do with government structure. My question has to do with, and thank you for your presentation, the Governor's Center for Local Government, which means that you are state employees. I can see there's a role for people in your profession to help with Act 47, which I've learned about, for distressed communities. But this is just a little bit high level, but wouldn't it be cheaper for our state government rather than going through home rule commission studies, to go back to the original law, which was what, in the 60s, and change the law from the 60s?
Yes. Yes is the answer to that question.
And that is why you vote.
Please.
Yes, but
Yeah.
that's why we vote. But we don't vote for that. It's not on our referendum to vote for a change in home rule
Yeah.
at the state level or to discontinue your jobs.
I'll make a quick plug, because you're right. We don't get a referendum on if we want to do any of this nonsense or not. We just have to do it if that's where we want to go. But what we do vote on is our state representatives and our state senators, and there's an awful lot of them that have not taken the opportunity to fix this. And it's not a Lancaster problem. It's not a Scranton, Pennsylvania problem. It's not a Pittsburgh problem. It's an everybody problem in the state of Pennsylvania. And it seems very simple and actually quite bipartisan. So that is where we get to have that voice. But unfortunately, the powers that be at present have not heard our complaint about our limitations. So yes, in short, you are correct.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Good evening.
Good evening, Arthur Morris, 400 block of West Chestnut Street. My concern really is this was announced last Thursday. It's now Wednesday. Now it's going to be Monday when you act on this. It just seemed terribly rushed. And I just wish that it had been announced a couple of months ago. So there would have been a time for people to learn more about this and get involved and maybe participate in the commission. So I have a question, if you can't now, if you could get back to me. I would love to know what other communities have pursued this and what kind of timelines when they first announced it. Because when you talk about how rushed this is going to be to get signatures and get on the ballot, the amount of time between when it was announced and to do that, and the time for these council members to act on something important within 5 days from today and Monday. I just think it's wrong. I doubt that you will change now. You would be better served waiting for another time to do this and to do it right and to take time to educate the public and for council to make a decision. I know at the end of the day, you're probably not going to do that, but I think it's unfortunate we are where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Peter Scudner. I am a resident of East Lampeter Township, but a property owner here in the city of Lancaster and operate 2 businesses in the city of Lancaster. I wanted to speak tonight very briefly in favor of proceeding with the study commission as part of a good governance approach to understanding and fixing some of the issues the city faces. But as the mayor so eloquently explained, it isn't the only fix. In fact, in 2011, there was a study commission, a panel empowered by Mayor Gray that published a report called Prosper or Perish. I was part of the team that drafted that report, and it addressed the very same issues that are facing the city today. And Harrisburg has not made changes. Ironically, within Act 47, they will permit the city to make some of those changes, but in order to exit Act 47, you have to abandon the things that they would allow you to do that would fix the problem in the first place. So there's problems in Harrisburg to address the funding and governance of our third-class cities. It's not an issue that council can fix on its own, but I would just encourage you to continue the study process because at least home rule gets you one step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
Feel free to move that wherever you need it to.
You can hear me, can't you?
I can.
Yeah, I brought it down, I'm sure. Okay, so I'm Susie Hoover, and I'm from the 200 block of East King Street. And I did notice, I kind of panicked when I saw that we were actually moving so quickly on this, and I didn't know any details and that sort of thing. I actually got a copy of the home rule book, and it is very thorough. In fact, it even has personal experience of commission members, a list of what that could look like, the basic nature of a charter. And the one thing that interested me in the back was listing of the, they have boroughs, townships, and cities, and they can have home rule. And I noticed, and York has the same classification of, and this is for Andrew, we are in an optional third-class city charter, and there is home rule and there is third-class city classifications. So what exactly is an optional third-class city charter law, if you can do it in a nutshell for us?
Sure, you've clearly done your homework too. Thank you. Optional plans are, brief, right?
Well,
So-
do we have
No,
time?
I can do this. I can do this.
He doesn't have to do 3
I think I can
minutes,
do-
right?
I think I can do
Yeah, more
this.
than-
No, I've stopped your time, but I think this is a good question.
Yeah, it really, yeah. So the original third-class city code was a commission form of government, which some still operate by, and that's where each city council member runs a separate department of the city. It is very difficult to manage that situation. Sometime in the 70s, third-class cities were given the option to just adopt. It's not a new charter of theirs. It's just adopt another optional form of government. Lancaster did that sometime in, I think, the 70s. And that's
66.
Thank you. And that's why we have a strong mayor form of government. We don't have, or Lancaster doesn't have the old, real archaic third-class commission form of government. So optional plans, there are 3 types of optional plans. One is a strong mayor. I think they're actually the scenarios I went over earlier, the strong mayor, weak mayor, and another scenario where the mayor is no longer a position, it's a council manager. But in those situations, it really just, the opportunity there was, some still can adopt that, not to change anything else about any of the things we covered, but just that council mayor situation.
Okay, and so I don't know if council members got the home rule book. It is really very, very good. And you can go online and read it online. I just need to take notes, so I got a printout copy.
Thank you very much.
Oh, my goodness. We can make sure that you have a copy, and you can connect that to your page.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we do have the link
I was gonna say,
on
I'll
the
get you the link.
on the page already. So if you visit Lancaster or cityoflancasterpa.gov, it's right there.
Good evening.
Julian Harnish. I'm from the 500 block of Woodward Street, Southeast Lancaster. I'm curious, it sounds like currently the council can raise property tax, but can't continue to raise income tax. So what are all the different tax categories that could be raised if home rule were adopted?
It really comes down to, you can actually remove the 30, it comes down to earned income tax and the realty deed transfer tax, which are both capped at 1%, subject to sharing with the school district, 0.5% and 0.5%, except the minor tweak in Lancaster, where there's an extra 1.1% due to an old law.
Okay, thanks.
And just to define those things, I think it would be helpful. The earned income tax is based on your income. That's very straightforward. And the real estate transfer tax happens when properties are bought and sold within the city of Lancaster. So there's a tax that's collected at that time, and right now it's flat and we can't change it.
Okay.
And things get bought and sold an awful lot in Lancaster.
Thank you.
I knew
You
I have already been here, Susie Hoover.
You have
200
about
block.
35 seconds left of your 3 minutes.
I wonder how long I had. Okay, I just want to agree with Art on that, because when I read about this, I actually panicked because I didn't know anything about it, and I hurried and got the home rule book so that I could kind of brief up on what it is. I'm surprised, and I pulled out my calendar and marked off the weeks, and so it seems like this is very rushed, and it could come on the ballot in the fall as compared to now. And actually, in primaries, our voters we have a lower voting population in primaries than later. I felt really rushed and about this whole thing and understanding what it is. So I just need to say that. And it's obvious a lot of your council members don't have the background either, or understand. So I think everyone needs to take a breath and then really become knowledgeable, and then we do it as a large group and vote. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
If I may respond to that. and
Mayor Sraji?
I do appreciate, Mayor Morris, your comments, and Susie, related to the sense of urgency. And it is true, there is a sense of urgency about this. And in large measure, that is because the ARPA dollars go away. And we talk about this all the time in terms of our 5-year projections, and Mayor Gray can speak to this. When Mayor Gray came into office, we had a $67 million projected deficit, and year after year after year worked on addressing that structural deficit. And we have a large percentage of our budget right now that is propped up by ARPA, and that is going away. And having a decision made by having a decision made in May, whether or not we're going to go in this direction, provides to the administration and council the opportunities to make more significant changes ahead of the cliff that is coming with ARPA. Additionally, if we pursue this and there's a decision that's made to advance a home rule charter, it's going to be dicey because that decision is going to be made in November of 2024, and we introduce the budget literally 2 weeks later. So there's going to have to be, like, if it's option A, it's this. If it's option B, it's this. And that's going to require some more work. But regardless, there is fundamental work to be done in the budget because we have an $8.7 million deficit that's looming in the not-too-distant future. And that's after we spend the entirety of our reserve fund. So that's the urgency, and I do appreciate that we've gotten to this place. There's going through the budget process that happened in December was tough. I mean, Ms. Byrd was here arguing against raising taxes, and I appreciate her perspective. We just can't keep raising taxes every year, property taxes every year. We just can't. So, yes, there's a sense of urgency, and there's a process between now and May to do a lot of education about what this is, and I'm committed to doing that, and I invite all of you to invite me and others to come and talk to whomever you'd like to.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just briefly, before we continue, hello, Ms. Byrd, to orient us again in the question that's before council, which is to decide whether or not to put on the ballot in May, so however many weeks, almost 13 weeks, I guess, from now-ish, 14, 15, 16, something like that. At any rate, to put the question on the ballot in May, whether or not we would like to even form a study commission. So we are a bit removed from the actual, any decision-making of that commission at this point, and that is the question that council is considering this evening. Good evening, Ms. Byrd.
Yes, Darlene Byrd, 200 block of South Ann Street. I do also express concerns about how fast we're doing this. I don't think we're going to get the turnout. I was going to ask you exactly how many voters. You said there's a percentage of voters that must show up and vote for this to pass?
No.
It's a majority vote.
Just a majority?
The signatures on on the nomination papers to be a candidate for the Government Study Commission is either 2% of the total voters in the last gubernatorial election, or 200 signatures, whichever is less.
Okay, just for the commission. Okay. So as we know, as this primary election is a local election, we do have a low turnout of voters. and that's been a record within the city. If we're trying to address all city residents' concerns and informing them, I mean, I do think it's fast. To say in 2 weeks, we know it's just a study, and honestly, by the time that the home rule actually passes, it's going to be a while anyway. It's not going to be next year, so the taxes you're already planning on raising because it's not going to take effect. I think if we're serious about making changes and really trying to address the taxation issue that we have, we need to take the time and inform the residents of the city. I mean, to do this in 2 weeks is really, really fast. I heard that you say that there's limitations on the taxation subjects that we can tax, like we cannot tax no non-residents. Is that correct with the home rule?
Yeah, that's correct. You can't remove caps on taxation for non-residents.
So let me ask council this one question. This council approved the Mosaic construction that's going up with the 150 units where people got to have $660,000. How will they be taxed different than, let's say, Mr. Ivan Acosta, who has identified himself as a poor resident? How is that going to affect? Because my understanding is earned income tax. So can council answer that?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that. So the difference between, so right now, the answer is not at all. Not differently at all.
Right.
The answer may be at the end of this process that the tax that's levied on those two, looking at two individuals, okay,
Right.
is different based on their earned income. For Mosaic, that's a 55 plus. Many of those people may still be earning income, and I would venture that it may be higher than, frankly, most every residence in the city. A progressive earned income tax would mean that their taxes would be higher and generate far greater revenue than someone on a fixed income. Today, we can't do that. We could do that at the end of this process that we're endeavoring to start today.
Because I was thinking that was for an older community, and most of those people would have set incomes as well, even though they're much greater and much higher. But that wouldn't be an earned income tax. And probably out of them 150 units, the amount that would be affected is not going to give me any tax relief or anyone else. I'm just using you right in. Any tax relief. But yet, we have this home rule charter. And if we're not seeing that, what other options does the state have to provide us in helping our distressed municipality besides saying, here's a home rule charter? I mean, that's your job, correct? To help cities that are in distress with options they have. Was any other option presented to the mayor or to the city council besides a home rule charter?
Well, I did mention the strategic management planning program earlier. Through that process, we develop a 5-term financial and operational strategy, which seeks to project financials into the future. And I'll say we do quite a few of those plans, not to digress too much, but more often than not across the Commonwealth, you see a structural imbalance in revenues and expenditures. Healthcare, inflation, pensions, collective bargaining agreements, contracts. I mean, that stuff goes up every year, regardless of what creative solutions you can come up with. And with stagnant revenue sources, it can be really hard to keep up. With the options available to municipalities, which are decided upon by the General Assembly. Looking at trying to find efficiencies, trying to figure out what might be able to be cut, are the things that, are the best bet. But the state, our shop can't provide any new types of revenues outside of what the parameters are, given to us by the General Assembly.
So you said a 5-term strategic plan strategy. What is that? I'm sorry, maybe you presented that as an option and I missed it.
Ms. Byrd, I'm going to allow him to answer this question, and then your 3 minutes is up, just to respect everyone's time. So please go ahead and answer that question.
It's a process where we'll look at the past 5 years of financials of a municipality to get a baseline of fiscal health, and then use those numbers to project 5 years into the future to see what type of gap might exist between revenues, expenditures, and try to provide recommendations to close that gap. And then through that plan, we can help fund recommendations. And as we mentioned earlier, we can take a look at grants to help fund the fact that home rule was mentioned in that plan.
So it would be something that we could do and then later look at a home rule and get out of that situation or not? Like do the 5-year strategic plan from now and give the community the time that they need to learn about the home rule and then maybe go that way next year or something?
Well,
Thank
we've
you, Ms.
already
Byrd.
done that effectively with our last grant for the strategic management. We had a review of our financials that was done by PFM, and that has all been incorporated into the budget and planning purposes.
Thank you. Mr. Morris, just only because you have had the opportunity, just 1 minute, if you would, please.
I think I only spoke a minute, but I can do it in a minute. 2 points.
Give you a
Arthur
minute.
Morris, 400 block of West Chestnut Street. 2 points, if I may. The situation we have now has existed for decades, where you have to balance a budget. Real estate taxes has always been a challenge. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't have a home rule, but you should not lose sight of the fact no matter what the presentation is, this is no different than when I was mayor from 1980 to 1990. We've always had a challenge with real estate and being concerned about pricing people out of the home. And I would guess it was just as difficult then as it is today, because income of people, Social Security's gone up, taxes have gone up. The challenge today is the same as it's been for years. So just so you know that. I've always supported tax reform. I understand the need to look at this. My concern on the timing, and I will say it again, is it's a shame. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't have been looked at now. It's a shame that this wasn't looked at when it could have been presented back, say, in December that we're going to do this, or back in early January. But to have done it now, and it seemed to be done in line with the state of the city, is unfortunate. That's all I'm saying. I think it places council in a difficult position of listening to the public and voting whether to proceed. I think that's unfortunate for council. You should have been given more time, and we should have been given more time. I understand the purpose of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further public comments this evening from anyone that hasn't already had an opportunity to
Well, I know I
address
didn't do
council
3 minutes.
first?
She spoke most of my time. I didn't do 3 minutes. I know that.
I will let you have another go, but I do want to make
I don't
sure that
need 3 minutes.
anyone
I
that
just-
hasn't gotten an opportunity to do so does, but please go ahead.
Well, I think, I agree with what he said. It's proven by you saying something like those folks who are going to be living in those properties for $900,000 are going to have earned income. Most of those folks are going to have investment income. They're not going to be paying taxes. This thing is rushed. It's just not having this. But who's going to be on the commission? You're not giving folks enough time to even, you guys have no idea what this home rule thing is, just from your questions. How do you expect normal citizens to have an idea what this is? That's all I'm saying. Give it some time and figure it out. Rush things do not turn out good.
Thank you. I do have someone who did not yet have the opportunity to speak. Good evening.
Good evening. Justin Kennel, 300 block of East Clay Street. So real quick, I had heard about home rule like 2 weeks before the mayor's announcement, and I was personally very excited because I do think that municipalities like Lancaster deserve the opportunity to make these kinds of decisions about themselves, and like has been pointed out, Harrisburg just does not care. I do think that like the things brought up about the urgency that has been kind of felt and the lack of public comment is also warranted. but we also are like running out of time for this. So I think that like the council should move forward with this, but they do need to make sure that the commission that is voted in is representative of the city and not, like wealthy people who just have time on their hands, right? Like, because if the purpose is to make sure that we have things like progressive income tax and that we are actually able to keep property taxes down, it has to be people who might not benefit from home rule as much as other people, they can't be the ones who are making up the committee. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much. And again, to orient us in the question this evening that's before us, is the council is deciding whether or not to put the formation of a study commission on the ballot. So not only would the voters decide whether or not the commission is formed, they also get to vote on who those individuals are through that petitioning process that we've outlined tonight. So that is an open opportunity and an opportunity for the voters to decide, not us, but the voters at large.
Council President, I have a quick question
Councilor Ahmed?
For the presenters. If we were to delay this and, postpone the charter, that's going to further push back the start of that 18-month period for the charter to take place, correct?
If you do not do it as of May's election, then you would have to wait till November.
And that would start 18 months from November.
Yes.
And that would, we wouldn't be able to provide relief for property taxes as I would hope to do in the time period, given the financial cliff that we're at, if we don't act in a somewhat expedited fashion. I guess it's a loaded question.
The question is then that become, if this question is on the ballot in November and the 18 months would begin at that point, then the earliest that the city could adopt a charter that would be recommended by this study commission would be 2026. Is that correct?
Yes, like we had said, I think when we were sitting here doing the math, we said January of 2025.
Based on May.
So we would probably be talking about January, because it does not go into effect until till January. So it would be January 2026 that you would be looking at.
Councilor Ahmed, does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yeah, that answers my question.
All right, thank you. Sir, just only because you've spoken before, just 1 minute, if there's anything else that you'd like to add?
I don't even need a minute. It's just to clarify the point you're discussing right now. While this might seem rushed, the question before council is whether you put a question on the ballot to form a commission. The ballot to decide on whether you act on that recommendation would be 18 months later, which happens to be the general election in November of 24, which is a presidential election and likely to have a very high turnout. If you delay, you'll be pushing the big decision, do you select a charter, into a primary the following year. So actually, for the voters to have the biggest voice, you probably want to proceed quicker than later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. Bennett Burhow, live in the 0 block of Lemon Street. Don't get to the 100s in our block. I simply want to encourage the council to in fact proceed with putting on the ballot the question of whether or not we will study this. Then to make the second comment, boy, do you have a huge education issue that you need to address. And I think you can understand that from many of the comments and the questions that you've heard tonight. You have a real uphill climb to have people understand what they're going to be voting for. And you need to put some time and energy into developing that strategy. Good luck.
Thank you.
Can I comment to that?
Yes.
That's not just going to be your council's job or your mayor's job to educate the residents, educate the community, everyone that is here. It's really going to be your job also, and I hope that we can get everyone to buy in to this, that you have to take a part and educate individuals and answer questions. And if you can't answer the questions, send them to the website, which we have all the information listed and resources listed. But everybody has to get involved with this to get the word out.
Thank you very much. I'll give anyone else an opportunity if there's public comment. And I'll also take this moment to say that, again, this is a first reading tonight of considering the question of whether or not to put the question of forming a study commission on the ballot for everyone to decide. If that is all of the public comment for this evening, I will also remind you that a second meeting where a vote is expected will be held on Monday, February 6th at 5:30 p.m. in this room. Having concluded our legislative agenda this evening, I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.